this, but it'd be easier to
Mm-hmm.
just do this if I just remember where I put it.
Recording.
Okay. Uh, Here it is. So I want to create a step that can be used as a placeholder for other trigger steps. So there's two main types of trigger step in the library. There's the HTTP one that starts an HTTP flow. And then there's the flow trigger steps. So the inbound flow trigger step is the one that's called wait for trigger from another flow. And then the outbound trigger steps are like trigger another flow and wait, and trigger other flow and proceed. Um, so I want to have a step that someone who's making a flow template can use, that can be a placeholder for those that if like, so if you're making a flow template to put in the library, and that flow is meant to work, that template is meant to work with like lots of different channels like Slack or Viber or WhatsApp or whatever, or you just don't know where the incoming trigger might come from. We don't want to. I want to have a step that we can put in that place, that will hold that place, but I don't know so how to put it other than that, like as a placeholder for other kinds of trigger step. But I also want that step to allow you to trigger the flow. So maybe a better way of thinking of this is as it's titled, a test trigger. So the idea is you put that step down, um, and it's either simple mode, which is that it will trigger the flow uh, without any arguments, like without any data input, or you can put it into. Oops, it should have. There we go. That's obviously a bug in this prototype. Um, so in simple mode, it doesn't put any. It doesn't send any properties when it triggers the flow. But with emulate HTTP trigger, essentially, I want the step to behave like a miniature. Um, so the steps behaves like an HTTP step, the HTTP trigger step, but where you can where it'll listen for the method that's given here. But the idea is that the user can then specify input, like things to trigger the flow with. Um, it's like body headers, query string params, and I haven't wired this, but that when you click on this, it will send an HTTP request that this step itself is listening for, and then trigger the flow. Um, so then I haven't done anything on this side either yet, but in the same way that I've recreated the HTTP step UI here, I would want to create a version of the flow trigger step here. So if they're doing uh, emulate HTTP trigger, then when they click trigger now, um, so it runs the flow, and so one way that they can get information on what happened when they did the test is to look at the logs. But since we're triggering the flow from here, we will actually get the post request or the get request or whatever here, the response. So when you click on that, if it's an HTTP, if it's set to emulate HTTP tree, I want it to pop up a dialog showing what the response was. Or if there was no response, then that. But and then if it's a flow trigger, I want it to do the same thing. If it's so, as you get into this, you'll see that if it's a if they with our flow triggers, it has two different modes. There's one that's for trigger another flow and wait for a response, which is synchronous and behaves just like HTTP. In that case, it would be able to pop up a response on the screen. Um, if it's the asynchronous one, then they won't have the option to see the response because it doesn't that method doesn't. There's no response when you're doing it asynchronously. So that's the main idea. And so when the response comes back, it'd be good. There'll be a dialogue it'd be good to find a visual presentation of that information that makes it easier for them to see the like make it look good. Make it easy to browse the data. I don't like something. I don't know. Like if there's, you can play around with it. Just find if we're using an external component, maybe you can use a visual library for rendering a JSON object nicely. But let's see some other details. So with the HTTP steps, the HTTP trigger step, its default merge field name is HTTP request. And for flow triggers, the flow trigger step, the default merge field name is, I think, oh God, incoming event or something like that. Whatever the default ones are for the library steps for the HTTP trigger step and the the flow trigger step. So if I've selected simple, there's no data out. If I've selected HTTP trigger and the merge field name is something other than that, I want the thing should pop up and say, do you want to change the merge field name to the library default of HTTP request? And then if they change this to emulate flow trigger, same thing. Do you want to change the default or the merge field name to whatever it was, incoming event? Because the goal is that if someone's using this to do testing, it should allow, it helps them to make it in alignment with how the library is set. Because if they've made it like this, but the name is incoming event, but it's meant to be an HTTP step flow, then if they use the merge field names in the later, they will be misaligned with the trigger type. Let's see what else. So then, once that's done, there's something that. So by the way, with the flow trigger thing, because this is within our system and not using HTTP, in order to get a flow response back in view, it has to go through HTTP. So we'll have to make a so we're working from the view. That will have to make an HTTP request to a provider flow. That provider flow will need to make emit a flow event to the test flow for response. And then when it gets that response, it will need to send HTTP response back to you. So you can put the provider flow, like a simulated provider flow, in your own account. We can put it, and then once it'd be something very simple. I mean, it's like this thing makes so it's the provider flow is just listening for a post request. Emits a flow to, that post request includes the properties of what flow to emit to, what account to emit, what account, what flow, or what account and what the trigger name is of that flow. And then try and get the response and then send it back to Vue, or send it back to the to the requester, which is our Vue UI here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so then I want to try and hack our logging system in a way. As I'm sure you've experienced, things take way too long for most logging behaviors. Like if the goal is if one of the goals of this is just to be a placeholder, but if another goal of it is to make it easier and faster to test things, then this whole thing of waiting for the logs to refresh and then picking through them takes too long. Because if I push this, I'll get, if I have an HTTP response step, I'll get, or if I created a flow response step, I'll get that instantaneous response, but I won't get any of the logging until like 30 to 60 seconds later, when this thing finally loads. So I'm curious if we can find a way of doing something like overwriting the log methods. There's one. We'll skip the debug one. Like when this, this is the first step in the flow. That, and in it, if we could, I don't know if there's maybe a way of hooking those, or there's a way of just overwriting them with some new function, so that besides doing what they normally do, which is sending the, so this is an SDK method, right? But if we, it's not exactly how it works. Let's see, message data. Do something like, you probably work with the storage API. I think it's this storage set. Like I don't know exactly, like essentially, so each log event, you wouldn't be able to set it, you'd have to get it, but anyway, with each log event, add it to, maybe we would have it, like, out of what's key value storage, like maybe we would have a temporary table that was named after this flow, and like each log event would be a different key, or I don't know what it is exactly, but the idea is somehow like either hook these SDK methods, or hook the events that are going along with them, or overwrite them, so that when the test is done, like when the response comes in, that the other thing that the UI does is goes and looks at the storage and finds a list of the log entries or something like that. I don't really care how it's done. I'm trying to just find a way of kind of working around this log viewer and giving someone an instantaneous log when as soon as they hit send, as soon as the flow is done, that you get to see both the response to the flow generated and also the logs that it generated during its execution. It may not be possible, and I'm sure that if I do that and show our platform team, they'll try and have me murdered. But I'm trying to drive. It's like a prototype just to drive the conversation forward about how to improve the logging experience.
I see.
Okay. So the first thing we do would be just let's get the basic test trigger stuff down and working, and then try and figure out a way of accomplishing the logging goal.
All right. So do we have a task already created in the GitLab?
No, I know, but I can create one later, or you can create one, either way.
Just to add the video and probably some explanations if needed.
Yep.
And log some time and estimates and everything.
Yep.
All right, so...
By the way, about the video, I couldn't access it from the GitLab. I downloaded from Skype.
All right, gotcha. I would figure out what is going on there. I guess that's all. Is that clear for you, Igor, for now?
Yes.
All right. So thank you, Jonathan, for the call. Yeah, and see you tomorrow, I guess.
Yep. Thanks,
So
guys.
have a great night. Goodbye.
Goodbye.